African Growth and Opportunity Act has lost one more member. After Ethiopia, Mali, Guinea-Conakry, the United States has decided to push away Burkina Faso, the West African country, for failure to return the country to constitutional rule. The announcement was passed by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and for a country to be part of AGOA, a group that provides sub-Saharan African nations with duty-free access to the United States. They are expected to meet eligibility requirements, and Burkina Faso could not meet these requirements. The West African country has recorded since 2022 to military coups, and all efforts to curb the activity of armed groups have proved fruitless. How detrimental will this move be for the relations between the United States, that is actually thriving to build with African nations? We shall be digging deep in today's edition of Talking Points. Stay with us. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to the first edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa, where today this is the first edition for the year 2023, and of course we are evoking the issue that the United States of America has decided to drop Burkina Faso, the West African country, out of AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunities Act. Of course, it's worth noting that as in 2022, Burkina Faso recorded 2 military coups that actually led to a change in the government in the West African country. And of course, AGOA says, or the US says, that it is dropping Burkina Faso for unconstitutional change, for failure for the country to return the country back to democracy. And of course, to evoke today's issue, we shall have as guest Mr. Nje Lucas, who is a political analyst in the West African country. He is equally a human rights activist. Good day to you, sir. Greetings to you, Mr. Nje Lucas, who is joining us all the way from the southwest region of Cameroon. Just to reiterate that you are a human rights activist and, of course, a political analyst. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, while we welcome our guests on today's topic of discussion, I'll beckon on you all to listen to this report compiled by the Central News Desk of For You Media Africa, evoking reasons why the United States decided to drop Burkina Faso out of AGOA. Take a listen. We shall be right back.
After Ethiopia, Mali and Guinea-Conakry, the United States has dropped Burkina Faso from its trade preference program, the African Growth and Opportunity Act AGOA, citing deep concerns over unconstitutional change in government in the West African country. The announcement was passed over the weekend by the U.S. Trade Representative USTR office. In 2022, Burkina Faso had witnessed 2 military coups, and yet the 2 military governments had made efforts towards beefing up the country's security and curb the activity of armed groups, all to no avail. AGOA provides sub-Saharan African nations with duty-free access to the United States if they meet specific eligibility requirements, and Burkina Faso had failed to meet the requirements of the AGOA statute. Burkina Faso had committed to returning to constitutional rule in 24 months in a July agreement, but reiterated in a November statement with the West African Regional Bloc, AGOA.
Ladies and gentlemen, having listened or watched that report compiled by the news desk of For You Media Africa, it's time we get down to discussion with our guests of today, Mr. Nje Lucas, who is joining us all the way from the southwest region of Cameroon. Good day once more to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Jake, and good afternoon, televiewers. It's a pleasure being on the panel today to look at issues which the African continent is plagued with under the guise of a free trade with the United States of America. It's a topical issue, and I think that it is time for young Africans and African leaders to assume their position and be effective.
Thank you immensely, Mr. J. Lucas. Just to say, as I earlier mentioned, you are a human rights activist and a political analyst here in Cameroon. Now, the first question I'd like to evoke for today is, what analysis do you make of this decision by the United States of America to drop Burkina Faso, noting that it is the fourth African country to have been dropped by the U.S. from AGOA?
I want to look at it from several points of view. I'll begin with that of the right of the United States to decide who to partner with. And I'll also look at it from the point of view of the people of Burkina Faso, who to indeed partner with. I want our viewers to understand that AGOA is actually an alliance that has more to take from Africa than what we could get from the United States of America. We all know that finished products are more expensive than primary products, whereas if you go by the quality of each primary product, you cannot compare it to the finished product. You can use a few beans of cocoa to actually produce a sachet of mambo chocolate, whereas if you were to look at the cost of that mambo chocolate, it cannot compare to that few beans of cocoa. On the 25th, the United States began looking at certain things, or whether to accept Burkina Faso or not. But I want to say that this comes after a decision that the Burkinabe government took with regard to certain alliance that she has with Russia. We shouldn't forget that the Wagner Group also is equally in Burkina Faso, which is actually spanning from Mali. And if you talk about Mali, you talk about Burkina Faso, we are saying that these are governments in place that the United States does not want. On the 2nd, America decided to take off Burkina Faso from the AGOA, which is they call it whatever they decided to term it. But I want to say that if you were to look at the benefits, African countries are not benefiting anything. We should say things the way they are. We should not be emotional because we want to satisfy our people. Most governments think that this is an opportunity for their countries to move further, but if you talk about African Growth and Opportunity Act, which the United States decided and initiated in 2002, has not been of any good help to Africans. Now, Burkina Faso is one of those countries which have decided that in order to rebuild the country, the civilian governments that have been in place successively have not actually brought in any development within the country. And we have seen 2 coup d'etats, and this has not been pleasant to the United States of America. I want our viewers to understand that the decision by the Wagner groups to start mining certain gold mines in Burkina Faso is problematic to the Washington government. It is not because the country has unconstitutional government in place. When I talk about unconstitutional change, I want the United States to understand that in 2020, January 6th, what happened in the Capitol Hill in the United States of America, where supporters of Donald Trump decided to mount the Capitol Hill, that was because they observed certain things that were not right in their country. And Donald Trump, if they are to talk about democracy in their country, I did not expect his candidacy in his party to be accepted. But what do we have? His candidacy in his party is being accepted by members of his party. Yes, Burkina Faso has in place a military junta whose objective is to rebuild the country. From what? If you look at the country in the past years, we are talking about the situation that happened with Thomas Sankara some years ago, which we still have it very fresh in our mind. And we are saying that Thomas Sankara, just like the others, we are yet to have justice for his death. We have not had that justice yet. So if the United States says Burkina Faso should not be part of the African Growth Opportunity Act, which is only called the AGOA Act, we have no issue with that. But they should ask themselves, what kind of government do they want in Burkina Faso? Is it that government that is a puppet? Is it a government that, when it comes in, it listens to what its masters want, or it's a government that is in a place to bring growth. It's a government that is in place to serve its citizens. I think this is what we should be asking the Americans.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Lucas, for that well put, of course, elaborate introduction. Now, in order to proceed, we recall that most recently the United States organized the U.S.-Africa Summit in a bid to solidify its relation with the African continent, given now that they have sent or pushed away Burkina Faso, which, as you earlier put it, it's in a bid for Burkina Faso to actually reason the type of government they actually want. Is this move put in place by the U.S. not going to affect its relations with Burkina Faso and Africa as a whole?
This is where I'll call on Macky Sall of Senegal and other African leaders to sit up and be reasonable. A few weeks ago, I want the viewers to understand that Cameroon is one of those countries that was dropped by the United States. Mm-hmm. And Cameroon is not reinstated yet. Mm-hmm. What happened a few weeks ago in Washington, where about 49 head of state were summoned, I wouldn't look at it to be a summit. They were summoned by Joe Biden to discuss issues of trade, which they call it the U.S. African Leaders Summit. Mm-hmm. Cameroon is a country that was dropped because of similar reasons for violation of human rights within the context of the ongoing crisis. Mm-hmm. Yet, Cameroon was called. The president of Cameroon was present in that summit. This is the hypocrisy of the West. This is what exactly the West wants. Mm. I want our viewers to understand that Americans say one of the reasons why they decided to drop Burkina Faso is because they are frustrated with Burkina Faso's inability to bring the jihadis to order. Mm-hmm. I want to ask this question. America says is the country that fights against terrorism, global terrorism. Mm-hmm. And we are talking about insurgencies in Burkina Faso. Now, if you drop this country and you want to fight against it in the war, because the war today has been proven by the Russia-Ukraine crisis that a country in the war is touched, every other country in the world is touched. We see it from the economy. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 came, which did not actually start in Africa. African countries are now in it. The war in Ukraine, which is ongoing, did not start in Africa. Mm-hmm. We are facing crisis. In particular, it's facing such crisis. Now, we are saying that the jihadists are said by the United States of America, who says, I am at the forefront to fight against it. Mm-hmm. They are taking hold of certain countries. And at this moment when we expect the United States to support this idea, to champion this their global call to fight against terrorism, which of course, if you look at the case of Cameroon, 3 persons were actually indicted by the US government who are said to be sponsors of the ongoing crisis in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. And you have the Burkina Faso today, who is dropped from AGOA. We talk about the African Growth and Opportunity Act. If you go to look at that, the first thing the US government highlights is your government has to be democratic. Mm-hmm. You have to be a democracy. You have to be a practicing democracy for you to be a member of the African Growth Opportunity Act. But when they called the country in New York a few weeks ago, where African leaders were packed up in a room as if there were some small boys in our quarters to discuss issues of trade, which African countries are not even capable to send any finished goods to the US. In fact, let me take our country. What goods can we produce and send to the US except for primary goods? And like I said in my introduction, the cost of you shipping a primary goods is relatively cheaper. And they are looking at a free zone to trade with, because the situation today in Europe is not the same. Mm-hmm. The EU countries The NAFTA deal that they had, the deal that they had with China, is not as it was, which of course the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, decried that China is actually exploiting the United States of America. And America finds the African continent, which she is in panic because the West is no longer having its grip, unlike the way the East talk about China do today. So the United States is in a panic, and because of this, they understand that there are countries in Africa that they want to deal with. And Burkina Faso has been dropped from AGOA. Yes, the African Union makes no mention about it. I want to call your attention, and to the televiewers, that if you go by what is happening, for example, if you touch a country within the EU zone, all the countries will stick out. Yet in Africa, a country in Africa is sidelined or dropped from certain deals. Other African countries find a lot of pleasure to deal with the United States of America. This is where we say that presidents of the African continent, they are not there because they love their people. They are there because they want a particular gain for themselves. And if you look at a country like Burkina Faso, though having a military leader in place, they are doing their best, just like Mali, to protect and to cause growth as the country deserves. The military junta in place came in and decided to call all former presidents and sat with them to discuss on how to make the country great as it ought to be. Yes, America is saying that the country is having an unconstitutional leadership in place. They are talking about unconstitutional change in place. So we should ask ourselves, is the United States one of those countries that promote insurgency, or it should be a country that fights against insurgency? Because one of the reasons they decided to drop Burkina Faso is that there is an upsurge, there is a growing concern of the jihadis in that particular country. The Islamic insurgency is growing, and to them it's a problem. And if you drop these countries from these trade deals, from this growth and this opportunities act, now, how do we fight this? We see today in the United States of America, where the Islamic insurgency carry out certain attacks. We see in France, we see in the entire EU countries, we see even in the East, we see them everywhere today in the world. We are supposed to come together as a people to fight these people. Yes, the United States says Burkina Faso is not worthy to be amongst countries of the African Growth Opportunity Act, which to them they see it as more of a goodwill something. I want to say that it is time for African leaders. Now, I'm calling on the African Union. We have to review every member country of the African Union. We have to review the relationship. For example, and to let the televiewers understand what is happening. When the BRICS decided and cast votes and went out of the European Union, it was not France that was now negotiating with Britain on deals, on trade deals. It was the EU. In fact, they voted in 2016 and they left effectively in 2020. 4 years later, before they could leave the European Union. Totally. So you may want to ask yourself, why should African countries be negotiating with such a gigantic nation like the United States of America as an individual? And when they bundle them as a country and victimize a member, the African Union doesn't speak. They only come to us to the normal saying that it is a toothless bulldog. It is an institution that is not there to protect the people in these countries. Rather, it is an institution that is there to protect similar persons, such as the head of state, the directors, and the rest. They are not for Africans. So I think it is time for the African continent to grow up. We as Africans have a lot.
Exactly, the African continent does have a lot. Sir, earlier on you brought forth the issue of benefits when it comes to the relationship that the African continent does share with the United States. And I would like to ask you back this question. In order to enlighten the African continent and beyond, do you think there are some benefits which, to some extent, Africa can gain from a partnership with the US?
Yes, it's obvious that there is a possibility that Africa will make some gains when you deal with. In fact, we are talking about trade. And when you talk about trade, the opportunities are there. Okay, we cannot wait away that. We have these opportunities. But what we need to note is that there cannot be balance of payment because Africa does not have that prowess like the US does when it comes to trading with the US. Africa does not actually possess that economy like the US does when it comes to trading with the US. Africa does not actually trade finished goods with the US when it comes to economic issues. For example, if you look at our gold, if you look at products made with gold or made out of gold, these products, we cannot sell them in the US. They will produce them there. We will produce the gold here. We will mine the gold, then ship it to them. They will come here, take it for just a token, and produce products with gold, then sell it back to Africa with a relatively higher cost. So if you look at the African Growth Opportunity Act, which is commonly known as the AGOA, which Burkina Faso has been taught today by the United States of America, it sounds as if it is going to be very heavy on the Burkina Faso. It is not as you may be thinking. This is a call and an opportunity for Africans to think about having also tertiary products. We have to finish our goods. We should also produce. We should not rely on these people. It is possible. If we don't want to produce, for example, I talk about you could take just a few cocoa beans. You could take about 6 cocoa beans to arrive a sachet of mambo, which is sold for 160. And these 6 cocoa beans, you can imagine the total number of cocoa beans per kilogram. And if you look at this in total, where these 6 cocoa beans can produce a sachet of mambo, which is sold for 200, how many cocoa beans contain a kilogram of cocoa? So you realize that when you sell your primary product, you are on the losing end than the person who sells finished product. Because the finished product is more expensive.
Yes.
So if Africa wants to trade with the United States, for example, I think we should tell the US that the companies that produces these cars which you sell to us should have their plants in the continent. They should have their plants in the continent. Technology-wise, you have patent rights. You have to go back and review the law governing your patent rights because we want to also have this that it should be produced in Africa. If we go by that, then there will be fair trade. But if you want to say that Burkina Faso is going to lose a lot or is losing a lot, I want to say that it is rather an opportunity for the government in place to why not start making deals with other countries they find worthy to deal with, to put their plans in Burkina Faso to produce certain things. If we say that we want to ship, for example, foodstuff, for example, let's assume that Burkina Faso produces certain foodstuff that could be shipped to the United States of America. The price should not be determined by the dollar bill because this is another issue which is becoming problematic. Today, for example, we see the Russia-Ukraine war. The cost of whatever leaves Russia is not determined by the dollar. The Russians have decided that it will not be decided by the dollar. So similarly, we could also bring in this because we know that it will be better than if we should rely on the dollar because we are on the losing end. You know how much it would have cost us if you were to compare with the dollar. So like I said, they cannot be fair trading with the US because the balance of payment cannot actually be there as we are expected. Just like the US decried when Donald Trump was there, that China was exploiting the US and they decided on certain things and cut certain deals off. Just like Donald Trump decided that the NAFTA deal, which he had to review it for the good of America. So Africans should also work on this because it's a need at this point in time. When somebody closes his door from you because of what he wants you to do and you are refusing to do, know that what you are doing on the other hand, when it comes to things like this, between the African continent and the West, I think it is time for us to also start the discussion as equals on the table, not as a boss and an employee.
Very powerful one there. It's good to equally have what they call equality when it comes to discussing matters that pertain to the African continent. If you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. You could equally be listening to us over a 4U radio from 96.3, but then we are discussing that the United States of America has decided to drop Burkina Faso, the West African nation, out of AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And as guest this afternoon, we have Mr. Nj. Lucas, who is a human rights activist and a political analyst. He's joined us all the way from Cameroon. In order to proceed with you, sir, now you have evoked a lot of powerful points, and I would like to bring forth that of cross-border trade. Cross-border trade is something that is really important to the African continent. Now, I would like to ask you, how important can a cross-border trade be, and how can the continent foster this trade in terms of economic growth and development?
We should not also forget, on the other hand, that cross-border trade in Africa is relatively porous because some regional blocks they talk a lot on paper, but they don't talk a lot in practice. For example, if I were to cite the case of Semak, it is very difficult for you as a Cameroonian to move into Equatorial Guinea and carry out business deals. It is difficult for you to move into Chad or into Central African Republic or into Gabon to carry out certain deals. This is the same thing that happens in other blocks. I think the West African state where Burkina Faso finds itself is relatively better. And if you look at it, it is a bloc for the very first in the African continent to have suggested that there should be a common currency. It was leaked out by a betrayer within the bloc, or in the person of the president of Ivory Coast, that's Cote d'Ivoire, which actually thwarted that. If you look at what is happening, for example, Burkina Faso, on the other hand, has a relatively very few deals with Mali. I don't want to consider it because I don't want to look at it from the point of view that it's because they are in a similar situation and they have a similar view by the West, or the West has a similar view or the same view between these two countries. I think the free trade zones in Africa is going to help us a lot. I want us to look at the case of the Schengen, therefore the EU countries. You realize that life is relatively easier within these countries because they can easily make one major barrier to this is the aspect of a common currency. In order to have an effective cross-border trade, the currency should not be different. Once the currency is different, it makes it difficult for this trade to move on. For example, if you look at where Burkina Faso belongs, let me take the case of where they belong in West Africa. They are not using the same currency with Ghana. They are not using the same currency with Nigeria and other countries within the same bloc. Now, this is where the problem lies. This is where the problem lies. Unlike in the EU, where you have the euro, it is not the same thing with these countries. And if you go to look at the situation of the EU, you have countries like when Britain was there, she has her own currency. It was not being used everywhere. It was simply a currency for their trade, for their deals, because they know it's a common currency within the bloc. So, in order to have effective cross-border trade between blocs within the African continent, I think that we should have a common currency. A common currency is going to cost it effective, and it will be better if there is a common currency. So I think that leaders should consider this. the citizens should put people in place who can push forward with this. We have the African leader, we have the African Parliament. I doubt what they discuss in their parliamentary session. We have regional parliament. I doubt what they discuss in their parliamentary sessions, because as it is, they are expected to be the oversight of every government in place, which is in all the cases, it isn't what is in place. And this is what makes it more troublesome, because the trade now has some limitations. So an effective cross-border trade can be in place when you have a single currency.
Definitely, it's true that before that comes into place, all the grandmasters of the African continent will have to sit down and see how they can actually deliberate on such a matter. Now we have several economic blocks on the African continent, now evoking the issue of economic growth and a current common currency. How can these blocks be more efficient so that they can produce what is better and great for the African continent? Mr. Nj. Lucas, are you with us? Hello, Mr. Nj. Lucas, can you hear us?
Yeah, please, could you take it once more again? I didn't get the question.
Okay, so I was saying that you have brought forth the issue of a common currency on the African continent, and given that we have several economic blocks, like you cited CEMAC, now how can these blocks be more efficient in order to ensure that when they sit down, they bring forth measures that are actually going to move the continent to higher heights? Okay, we're actually expecting Mr. Nj. Lucas to be back with us on today's edition of Talking Point, but we're going to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking that, or saying on today's edition of Talking Point, that the United States has decided to drop Burkina Faso, which is the fourth African country, out of AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And of course, as Mr. Nj. Lucas was our guest for today, cited, we've had several issues, and the African continent happens to be exporting most of its raw materials to the Western world rather than importing. And the cases when these raw materials or the finished products are brought back to the African continent, they're sold to the African people who actually produce the raw materials at very expensive and high cost. Of course, we are just getting indications that we have Mr. Nj. Lucas back with us this afternoon. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. There was a question which I think would be good to make some submissions on it.
Yes, so the question I was asking is, you brought the issue of common currency in the African continent, and given that there are several economy blocks, like you cited CEMAC, how can they push to be more efficient so that when they sit down to discuss, the measures they're going to bring forth are going to be measures that will push the African continent to higher levels?
I think it's very simple. Sometimes we regionalize people. I want you to understand that the CEMAC block, when I start and I said, let me take a deep look at this, I realized, for example, that the CEMAC block was made based on the way the French wanted. Okay? Cameroon could appear being in West Africa, because if you were to describe Cameroon to somebody who doesn't know Cameroon, looking at the map, Cameroon also falls within the West African bloc. So the question is, why is Cameroon in the CEMAC zone? That's the question. Why does Cameroon belong to that bloc? Cameroon is in this bloc because she finds some trading opportunities. There are some opportunities. For example, we have countries like Chad, we have countries like Central African Republic. We have countries like Gabon. You cannot compare their sea to their waters to our waters. You have countries like Equatorial Guinea, and what they produce, we don't produce that. So some countries find themselves in certain blocks based on the prowess they have, because they know that they can exert some authority and some opportunities. They can explore some opportunities also within that area and exploit also the people within the particular area. So the issue of common currency, we could make it in blocks. For example, like I said, the West African bloc would have a common currency. There wouldn't be any problem with that. Yeah, it could have a common for example, we have a common currency within the SMAC zone. For example, the SMAC zone has the same, but the West African bloc does not have the same. The West African bloc does not have the same currency. Now, once you have the same currency within this bloc, it facilitates trade. It facilitates trade. If you look at the CFA bill, which is now in circulation, which went into circulation on the 15th of December, you realize that CFA bill is now unique. Now unique. You have the same CFA bill. But what is actually not the same is that if you go to look at countries like Ivory Coast, they don't have the same CFA bill. That's it. They don't have the same CFA bill. So I think we should consider having a particular currency to facilitate trade. So when the African leaders sit, when they sit in the African Union, when they sit in their different blocks, these different blocks have parliament. They have their own parliament. And when they sit, I expect that there are things that they should put on the table. Sometimes they tell us that no, they are discussing these things for the good of the people. But I want to say that if you were to do a vox pop, if you were to do a plebiscite or a referendum on that, you realize that the decision for America to remove Burkina Faso from AGOA, on the other hand, is because it is a bloc that does not protect its own. Okay, it's a bloc that does not protect its own. Now, it shouldn't be a problem that Burkina Faso is booted out of the African Growth Opportunity Act. It shouldn't be a problem. That bloc understands how to protect one another. Now, when the BRICS voted in 2016 and left the European Union, France, they have had some issues with it. But negotiations further, like I earlier explained, on how to trade with Britain was not decided by Germany solely. It was not decided by the Netherlands solely. It was not decided by France solely. It was not decided by Switzerland solely. It was decided by the European Union. You understand? This is to tell you that it is because of the common currency, the common zone that they have, the Schengen zone that they share. That is the reason for such decisions. So, this bloc, we should have a common currency. With this common currency, it can facilitate, it can easily bring the growth that we desire. The cross-border trade is going to be easier. So, let this bloc, when they see, this is what they should be looking at. If they really care, if they really think, if they are thinking about their people, if they are not saying this because they want to do some lip service and some window dressing, if they are saying this because they want to have some personal gains, then they have missed it. But if they are doing all of this because they want to solve the people's problem, then the situation will change. Now, I want to ask us a question, for example. For the number of years we have had this common bloc with different currencies, can you measure the growth? What growth do we have in these places? It's different compared to other blocks that have a common currency. So I think we should adopt the common currency in these blocks if we want to have a commensurate growth with regards to the amount of energy we put on mere talks. If we want to match word with action and action to word and the other way around, then we need this common currency.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Nji Lucas. We're gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Points. But then I'd like to ask you this question. In Africa, we have several countries that are facing tensions amongst themselves. And now we have this issue of solidarity amongst African leaders. Now, in order to push forward with a view of a better continent, how can Africa's first tackle this issue of non-solidarity?
Africa does not have solidarity among its leaders. It is very appalling. It's heartbreaking. African leaders do not care about each other. Muammar Gaddafi was slaughtered, he was killed, it meant nothing to them. Severally, Robert Mugabe was victimized, it meant nothing to them. Today we are talking about Burkina Faso, it meant nothing to them. So African leaders need to come together. The white man's view with regards to Africa is a farm to him. And where you can invite that farm for effective work, the white man will do that. Okay, the white man will do that. I say this because when we talk about the white man, we are talking about our Western government. They will do that. For example, why has the African Union been this silent with regards to what America just said concerning Burkina Faso? Why are they silent? There is no solidarity. And I want to draw the attention that it is lack of solidarity that is actually causing the exploitation of the African continent by the West. Take for example, Ukraine is yet to become an EU member country. Ukraine is not even a NATO member country. Ukraine is not part of the NATO country. It's not part of the EU country. But if you look at the support that is coming from NATO, it is because Ukraine has put her interest at one point in time to be a member. Okay? This is to tell you that by mere interest, by mere call that I want to belong, you see the amount of support that Ukraine is having. The United States has put in billions of dollars to fight the war in Ukraine. They are putting more than 15 billion US dollars to fight this war in Ukraine. The EU is putting so much. The Germans are putting it personally to fight the war in Ukraine. This is to tell you how much they are working as a team, how much solidarity reigns in them, within them. So the African continent, we have to think about loving ourselves. We have to think about each other. When a president is victimized in Africa, we should not celebrate it. Because the white man doesn't do that because they love us. Okay? They do so because they want to exploit us. They do so because they want to further divide us. Gaddafi was locked up with all the lofty ideas that he was to grow the African continent. It meant nothing to other African leaders. The African Union made no official statement, even when NATO invaded Libya. They said nothing when NATO did that to Libya. So I think it's because there is so much division in the African continent. So we want to see that solidarity. We want to see that solidarity grow. We want to see that solidarity in Africa move to a level where once a country is touched, for example, the other countries should say that, okay, we are no longer interested in AGOA because Burkina Faso has been dropped. Cameroon was dropped. They said nothing. We decried that. Cameroon was dropped from AGOA some years ago, a few years ago. Nobody said anything. Burkina Faso today is being victimized by the same United States of America. Whereas a few weeks ago, I haven't had a meeting with African continents and they understood where to have a substitute from what they make from Burkina Faso. They were quick to lay off Burkina Faso from Africa. On the second, which is very, very terrible. That should be on Monday when they took that decision that Burkina Faso was not going to be among the countries that would benefit from the African Growth Opportunity Act of the United States of America, which they think it's a good deal. But I don't see it's a good deal because, firstly, it's a deal that has more of you exploiting the other. Like I said before, a few beans of cocoa beans produces mambo. How many cocoa beans do we have in a sachet of cocoa that contains a kilogram, which is a kilogram? This is what we should be looking at. So I think this is the moment for African leaders to beef up their solidarity. A leader is touched, we are all touched. A country is sanctioned, we are all sanctioned. If we are taking action, it should be our action. The African Union needs to sit up. We need to work hard. The Kwame Nkrumahs and the rest, this is not what they anticipated for the African Union. They did not anticipate this for the African continent. When Kwame Nkrumah and the others laid their lives and decided that this particular agency was going to rise from the African continent, when people like the KC played, when the Martin Luther King Jr. understood that they are Africans and they were now seeking more for the African continent, they didn't see all what these African leaders they are perpetrating. What they are doing today is not helping Africa. It is not good. So let Macky Sall, who is set to be the head, do something. Let the head of the African Union do something. We are tired of seeing the African Union being an institution that cannot work. Firstly, just to conclude, that for the fact that the African Union does not take away that permanent seat which the EU and the US have, it makes the African Union
Thank you.
The European Union.
Thank you immensely, Mr. Nji Lucas, for the powerful message you have sent out to the African continent and beyond. That was a powerful message for African leaders on African solidarity. Mr. Nji Lucas, you are a human rights activist and a political analyst. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, G. It's a pleasure, and we have to view Africa. If we are saying all of this, it's because we want our African leaders to rise up. It is time to begin the rebuilding of Africa. If I go by what Walter Rooney once said, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, if I should think about the fact that the first university in the world was in Timbuktu in Africa, the Socrates and the others, they came to Africa, studied philosophy, studied astrology and all whatnot, and today everything is going back. We are taking it from the West. It is indeed heartbreaking. I think it is time for young Africans to come on board. We have to view Africa. Thank you.
Thank you too. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel. I have been Jakes Nabuse for presentation. God bless you, and programs continue over For You Media.